And then how about the Olympics? I didn't make excuses for why I didn't win. I broke my ankle in the earlier round. Yeah, some dude crashed into me, which fucked me up. Yeah. No, the bottom line is I got passed by 1 inch in the semifinals, and they finished through the finish line before me because I made a mistake earlier on in the round. And I'm referring to the 2014 Sochi Olympics. I raced border cross. I don't say, oh yeah, but if he wouldn't have done this or that, blah, blah, blah. No, I trained my ass off for 3 years. All I did was snowboard and skate to win the Olympics, and I didn't. That all came down to one day that I trained so hard for, and so many people do the same. And that was a painful game because you're left with nothing. And not only that, you're not getting paid, at least in America, unless you're like the top 1% of one athlete that somehow did something very specific. The average of all those Olympians, they're working landscaping jobs, they're working construction jobs to pay for their Olympic dream. There's people that have killed themselves over that game. The Olympic game, like so many Olympians have killed themselves. The pressure is I remember telling myself I'm never doing it again. It's hard, man. July 13th, 2015, I sat there on the couch with a broken ankle after the Olympics, depressed, hungover, and said, you're responsible for this. Now change your life. I knew I needed to crawl out of this abyss or I was on that day, July 13th, 2015, laying there on the couch, on my parents' couch, I bought this book by Brian Tracy called No Excuses. I don't even think it was that good of a book, but I remember that day it served as a marker for me. Clean up your life. Nobody's going to do it for you. Same thing on January 18th, 2015. Drunk on the floor with some chick who was a bartender, not even a bartender, a waitress in Austria. Missed the qualifiers for the world championships that I flew across the world for. Haven't had one sip of alcohol since. To this day, I took ownership for an undisciplined part of my life and owned it. From that day, I said, I'm going 5 years. I'm going to see who I become by not having alcohol in my life for 5 years. All my friends changed, not all of them, but a lot of friends changed. A lot of different situations that I normally would maybe be in, from a young punk snowboarder kid that could travel the world with a bunch of money and drink and do whatever the hell he wanted. Finally took responsibility and added some discipline into his life by not drinking. It's now been well over 8 years and I haven't had a sip of alcohol, and I probably won't ever touch it. It just doesn't do anything good for anyone. Like, unless you can casually have a drink of wine at dinner or whatever, like if people are, drinkers, you ain't getting done. That's not doing anything good for you. I don't care who you are. So anyway, how about when the cartel took over my property? I know you remember that one. I rented out my house to some kids claiming they were going to harvest bees and grow a little weed. I rented out my house to some kids, yep. And this is the skate house in Paso Robles, now owned by, you don't need to, I'll give the privacy there, but I built a skate park up against my house, had 20 acres, dirt bike tracks, foam pits, all the skate, everything. Ended up selling it because of this situation. I leave the country, tell these guys to pay on time. 6 months later, didn't tell them I was showing up, but 6 months later, I walk up to an 18-year-old Mexican kid holding a rifle standing in my driveway. I'm like, what the is going on? And I don't I drive over to the house. My entire property is covered in weed. Every ounce of the 20 acres is a weed plant everywhere. I'm like, holy. The skate park is covered in soil. The whole entire skate park, dude, the concrete, everything, they were growing weed on the concrete. So like if you couldn't skate, it was all dirt and soil and weed plants. 20 different girls and guys as I walk up, sleeping on the concrete skate park on mattresses outside. And I'm just painting the picture here for you what's going on. I walk inside the house and soil on the floor. Weed plants growing on my floor. Like not in a pot, like tile, and then soil and weed coming off the floor. Never seen anything like that in my life. I knew I was in some deep because everywhere you look is weed and people running and like doing just like this crazy operation. And I knew, I was like, holy. So I think, what do? Do I call the cops? What happens when the cartel find out that I called the cops? They're coming for my head. I left that day as like I was like 21, I think, 22. Like, what are my options here? So I meditated on it. And every ounce of me told me to call the cops. My dad at the time was like, the dumbest shit you could ever do is call the cops. And he was looking at, from a intelligent, I guess, fearful position of, those cartel are coming for your head. And I didn't know. Over time, I should have been more responsible as a property owner. But then again, I'm like this, kid with, oh, it'll all work out, da da da. Next thing I know, I'm renting a property to the cartel. Like, what? What? I don't have anything to do with drugs. I don't have anything to do with weed. I don't smoke weed. Like, I have nothing to do with this. How did I get myself in this situation? And why am I in this situation? So push comes to shove. I'm like, screw this. I'm calling the cops. I was literally on the phone with the cops. It's ringing. And as soon as the dispatcher answered, I hung up. I just couldn't do it. Then 3 weeks later, my neighbor sends me a picture of the SWAT team at my house. Because I'm like, I'm not going anywhere near there. I have nothing to do with this. But then I literally like 40 blacked out cars, SWAT cars, military helmets, the whole, not military, but like the SWAT team, dude, is there. Like the whole entire road's blocked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. So I guess they had $30 million of weed plants growing on my property. Then guess what? Those ran into the hills. When they saw they were getting raided, they had enough time. They ran into the hills. They sent attack dogs after them, and they were real experts. They stripped down naked to throw off the dogs' smell, like their scent. So these guys ran into the hills naked, and guess what? They got away. So what do you think the cops' next move was? Call the property owner. So I get a call about all this. The next thing, I get some document emailed to me. They were coming after me for $500,000 in fines for the weed. Because there was like a per plant per day fine. And then they were like giving me the benefit of the doubt type of thing where they didn't charge me for like all of it, but they were like, we'll be good with $500K in fines for this guy. And they thought that I was the kid. And it made perfect sense at the time because you think about my path at that time was like, I went to the Olympics. I got all depressed. I broke my ankle. I was injured. I wasn't really doing and this is not the truth. Like they thought like, this kid just went like pro action sports kid turned weed grower. It like fully makes sense, but that was not the truth. The truth was I rented it to the cartel apparently, but that's what they were running with. And it made sense. Now that I look back, I'm like, yeah, of course they're going to think that, but it wasn't the truth. I don't have anything to do with drugs, never have. But the real reason behind it was they couldn't catch the people that did it. They got away. So they needed to pin it on someone. And, since they couldn't catch them, I recently found out, and this might even be bullshit, but the laws that were broken fall back on the property owner. At least that's what the California Fish and Wildlife told me, that you are responsible. You own the land. You should have been more responsible to who you rented to. You should have looked after it. You should have called the cops, whatever. You're responsible. And I'm like, well, I don't really know if that's how it works, but if that's how it works, okay. But I'm telling you, I didn't do it. And I didn't. But I was the property owner. And they also called in the building permits, the planning, all the city, the county, all the stuff. And they called in my foam pit at the time as a building or structure without a permit, a $60,000 fine. They found out all this other random stuff wrong with the property, saying I was illegally storing water in a blue line stream, which was really just a cattle pond built back in the 60s. So I had to prove to the Fish and Wildlife through old aerial imagery. There was one picture taken of my property aerially in like 1973 or something. I found it on this online database through like the Santa Barbara College had this old database of files online. Like I spent years on that trying to get out, not years, probably a full year. And I told the Department of Fish and Wildlife and all the other departments involved the exact truth. And guess what? They didn't believe me. But I still took full ownership. These guys had me crying on the phone, like so stressed out of my mind. But I told them the absolute truth. I said, look, here's exactly what happened. It took me 6 months of proving them and convincing them that it wasn't my operation, because it wasn't. They still charged me with $20,000 in fines for the weed, even though I had nothing to do with it. Guess what? I took responsibility. I'll own it. Move on. This brings up other times I got in trouble with the law. How about going to prison in Ohio for train hopping? Having a gun barrel pointed down my fucking head, like down towards my forehead. Black revolver pointed straight at the temple, never forget, or the forehead. Rushed to an Ohio prison. What an experience. I remember talking to the judge as a young 18-year-old kid because they were like, what are we going to do with these guys? And I'm thinking, how am I here? But I got in front of the judge on a TV screen from the prison cell or from wherever we were inside the prison. And I told the judge, look, judge, I fucked up. We hopped on this train. We shouldn't have. We're on a skate trip. We shouldn't be here. Please help. The judge looks at me, young, skinny, 18-year-old surrounded by murderers, and goes, listen, son, I'm not telling you to never hop a freight train again. I'm telling you to never hop a freight train in my county again. I'm letting you out Wednesday at 10 a.m. That was his words. I'm like, and I literally like, can't we like get out today? Like, please, like, please. He's like, nope. It was like a Monday. We had been there through the weekend. He's like, Wednesday, 10 a.m. All right. But I told him the truth, and he gave me what he thought I deserved. A few days later, I'm back on a freight train headed towards Kentucky. How about when I got stuck in the middle of a bomb threat in Amsterdam airport? For whatever reason, I chose to be there at that exact time and place, which I obviously didn't consciously think, but I owned it. We were huddled up, thousands of randoms in an airport terminal thinking we're all going to die. Did I want to be there? Of course not, but I owned it. I had to. There's no other way you could be anywhere else. I was stuck in that moment. You got to own it. Take responsibility for it for whatever reason.